Hello and welcome to this delightful, clean, historical Western romance by Shelfie audiobook. We're thrilled to have you join us. Before we dive in, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button, give this audiobook a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Your support in these small ways helps us bring you more heartwarming romance stories at no cost. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself be swept away into a world of adventure, love, and unforgettable characters. Enjoy! This audiobook is copyrighted by Shelfie Bennett. Chapter 1. Dust and Dignity. The stagecoach rattled over the rutted dirt road, sending Sophia Fairbank lurching against the leather seat. She braced herself with one gloved hand against the window frame, while the other clutched her reticule as if it contained the crown jewels instead of her last $17.83. A particularly violent bump lifted her clean off the seat. Her breath escaped in a most unladylike grunt as she landed, sending a fresh coating of dust to settle upon the black bombazine of her morning dress. 3 days of travel had transformed the once immaculate garment into a sorry state, much like its wearer. "Silverado coming up, ma'am," the driver called from above. "End of the line." Sophia peered through the window as the stagecoach slowed. The October sun cast long afternoon shadows across a single wide street lined with false-fronted wooden buildings. Miners with trail-stained clothing lounged outside an establishment bearing a crudely painted sign proclaiming it the Silver Dollar. Women in gaudy dresses with painted faces leaned from upstairs windows, calling enticements to passers-by. The stagecoach jerked to a stop before a building marked Silverado Hotel, more a glorified boarding house than the elegant establishments she'd known in Boston. But it would have to do. Sophia drew a deep breath, forcing her spine straight despite bone-deep weariness. She might be destitute, but she was still a lady. The side door swung open. The driver, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, offered his hand. "Watch your step, Mrs. Fairbank." Before Sophia could grasp his outstretched hand, a burly figure shoved him aside. The stench of whiskey and unwashed mail assaulted her senses as a bearded face appeared in the doorway. "Well, looky what we got here, boys," the miner leered, revealing tobacco-stained teeth beneath a bushy mustache. "Fresh meat for the silver dollar." Several men gathered behind him, their laughter echoing down the street. One called out, "Matarose'll pay top dollar for a fancy piece like that." Sophia's cheeks blazed with humiliation, but she lifted her chin. 6 generations of Fairbank women had faced adversity with dignity. She would do no less. With deliberate movements, she adjusted her black bonnet and fixed the miner with the same quelling stare she'd once used on impertinent servants. "I am Mrs. Sophia Fairbank, sir, and you will step aside." The miner blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being addressed in such a manner by a potential victim. In his momentary confusion, Sophia seized her opportunity. She swept past him, descending from the coach with as much grace as her stiff limbs allowed. "My baggage, if you please," she instructed the driver, who hurried to retrieve her single trunk from the roof rack. "Yes," he said, clearly relieved she'd handled the situation without requiring his intervention. "That'll be the porter from the hotel coming now." A gangly youth sprinted across the street, nearly colliding with a water trough in his haste. "Begging your pardon, ma'am. Mr. Tolliver sent me to fetch your things." Sophia nodded her approval as the boy hefted her trunk with surprising strength. She followed him toward the hotel, acutely aware of the miner's gazes burning into her back. With each measured step, she silently recited the mantras of Mrs. Winter's finishing school for young ladies. "A gentlewoman reveals no distress. A gentlewoman maintains her composure in all circumstances." Winters had failed to mention what a gentlewoman should do when she found herself widowed, penniless, and alone in a mining town 2,000 miles from home. The hotel room measured barely 8 feet square, with a narrow iron bedstead, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, and a single spindly chair. The floral wallpaper had faded to a sickly yellow, peeling at the corners to reveal earlier patterns beneath. A threadbare rug covered warped floorboards that creaked with every step. Sophia sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing her shoulders to slump. She removed her bonnet with trembling fingers, setting it carefully beside her. After a moment's hesitation, she reached into her reticule and withdrew the items that represented the sum total of her worldly resources: a small stack of bills and Charles's gold pocket watch. $17 would not last long, even in Silverado. She had already paid for 3 nights' lodging, leaving barely enough for meals while she sought employment. What had seemed a reasonable plan in Boston now appeared hopelessly naive. Schoolteacher. That had been her first thought. With her education, surely she could instruct the local children. But her inquiries upon check-in had revealed the position filled by a minister's daughter who had arrived just last month, seamstress. Her needlework had always drawn compliments, though she'd never sewn for payment. The clerk had directed her to Mrs. Patterson, the town's only seamstress, who had bluntly informed her that Silverado barely supported 1 needleworker, let alone 2 domestic service. The very thought made her stomach clench, but pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yet even here, she had found no takers. The few prosperous families already had help, and the majority of Silverado's residents could barely afford to feed themselves, let alone hire household staff. Sophia clicked open the watch, running her thumb over the inscription inside the case. To Charles, all my love, Sophia. A wedding gift she had purchased with money borrowed from her father, never suspecting that Charles was already gambling away her dowry. The portrait miniature inside showed Charles as she preferred to remember him. Handsome, smiling, his golden hair gleaming in the studio lights, not as he had appeared in that final confrontation, face twisted with rage as he informed her that her father's debts, which he had promised to settle, were now joined by his own considerable losses. The watch mechanism stuttered as she closed it, the second hand jerking irregularly. Like her life, its smooth functioning had been disrupted beyond repair. A movement across the street caught her attention. Through the small window, she observed a man working at a forge in an open-fronted shop. Even from this distance, the breadth of his shoulders was apparent beneath a leather apron. He lifted a glowing piece of metal, bringing a hammer down with controlled force. Sparks scattered like fireflies in the gathering dusk. There was something mesmerizing about his movements, a fluid economy that spoke of strength harnessed for creation rather than destruction. When he paused to wipe his brow with a forearm, she glimpsed his face. All angles and planes, partly obscured by a dark beard. Not conventionally handsome like Charles, but compelling in its intensity. A sharp rap at the door startled her. She hastily tucked the watch away and smoothed her skirts before opening it. The landlady stood in the hallway, arms folded across an ample bosom barely contained by a dress of shocking purple. Her rouged lips formed a smile that did not reach her shrewd eyes. "Mrs. Fairbank, isn't it? I'm Mrs. Tolliver. Just checking you're settled proper." "Yes, thank you. The accommodation is adequate." Mrs. Tolliver's gaze swept the room, lingering on Sophia's trunk. 3 nights, the clerk says you paid for. "That's correct. And after that?" Sophia stiffened. "I intend to secure employment, Mrs. Tolliver. I assure you I will meet all financial obligations." The landlady's smile widened, revealing a gold tooth. "No offense meant, dearie, just that we get all sorts through here. Women on their own." She let the implication hang in the air. "If you're looking for work, Madame Rosa at the Silver Dollar is always hiring pretty girls." Heat flooded Sophia's face. "I am a widow, not a—" "No need to get uppity," Mrs. Tolliver interrupted. "Just offering friendly advice. This ain't Boston. Out here, a woman does what she must." Her expression hardened. "I'll need payment in advance for any nights beyond the 3, no exceptions, even for ladies in mourning. Clear?" "Perfectly." After the landlady departed, Sophia closed the door and leaned against it, eyes burning with unshed tears. A gentlewoman reveals no distress. But as she stared at the cracked ceiling, listening to the sounds of raucous laughter drifting from the saloon down the street, Sophia Fairbank allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She had fled Boston hoping to escape scandal and make a new start, only to find herself teetering on the edge of a different kind of ruin. The pocket watch ticked irregularly in her hand, counting down the hours until her meager funds ran out. 3 days to find respectable employment in a town that had no use for a lady who could play the pianoforte, paint watercolors, and recite poetry in 3 languages. 3 days before she might have to consider Mrs. Tolliver's friendly advice. Across the street, the blacksmith's hammer rang out in the gathering darkness, the rhythm as inexorable as time itself. Sophia stood before the Silver Dollar Saloon as the afternoon sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that belied her dark circumstances. 3 days had passed with alarming speed. Her funds were nearly depleted, and no respectable employment had materialized. The swinging doors before her might as well have been the gates to perdition. Piano music spilled into the street, accompanied by raucous male laughter and the occasional feminine trill. A cowboy stumbled out, nearly colliding with her before tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy and weaving down the boardwalk. The reek of whiskey and tobacco smoke wafted through the doorway. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, clutching Charles's pocket watch through the fabric of her dress. She had changed from her morning attire into her second-best day dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite fashionable in Boston drawing rooms. Now, like its owner, it seemed woefully out of place. Drawing a steadying breath, Sophia pushed through the batwing doors. The cacophony assaulted her senses. Clinking glasses, boisterous conversation, a skinny man pounding out a lively tune on an upright piano that had clearly seen better days. Smoke hung in layers beneath the oil lamps, and the floorboards were sticky beneath her boots. Several heads turned in her direction. A momentary lull in conversation swept through the room like a wave before the noise resumed at twice the volume. "Well, well, you're not my usual applicant." The voice belonged to a tall, statuesque woman who had materialized beside her. Despite being well past 40, she carried herself with the confidence of a queen. Her black hair, streaked with dignified silver, was arranged in an elaborate style that complemented her striking features. Her burgundy dress, cut lower than proper society would allow, but modest by saloon standards, was of fine quality. "Madame Rosa?" Sophia inquired, striving to keep her voice steady. "The same." The woman's dark eyes assessed Sophia from bonnet to boots. "You're the widow from the hotel, yes? Looking for work, I presume, not a social call?" Sophia nodded, her throat suddenly dry. Madame Rosa gestured toward a small office at the rear. "Come, we'll talk where it's quieter." The office was a revelation. Neat, well-appointed, with a handsome desk and ledgers arranged with military precision. A bookshelf held actual books, not the dime novels Sophia would have expected. Madame Rosa closed the door, muffling the saloon's din, and indicated a chair before seating herself behind the desk. "Mrs. Fairbank, isn't it?" At Sophia's surprised look, she smiled. "Silverado has one street. News travels faster than dust in a windstorm. I know you've tried for every respectable position in town." Sophia's cheeks burned. "Then you know I have no experience in establishments such as yours. Precisely why we're having this conversation." Madame Rosa leaned forward, hands folded on the desktop. "You're too skinny and too proper, but men like novelty. You can serve drinks and smile. Dancing and more pays extra." Sophia's spine stiffened. "I'll serve drinks, ma'am, nothing more." Instead of the anger she expected, Madame Rosa's lips curved in what appeared to be approval. "Good. I respect a woman who states her limits clearly. You'll get 50 cents per night plus tips, minus the cost of a serving dress. You break anything, it comes from your wages. That seems fair." "Fair has nothing to do with it." "That's the arrangement." Madame Rosa stood, signaling the end of the interview. "Jenny will show you the ropes. You start tonight." She paused, her expression softening fractionally. "A word of advice, Mrs. Fairbank. Leave your wedding ring in your room. You'll earn better tips, and it will spare you unwanted questions." An hour later, Sophia barely recognized herself in the small mirror of the back room. The serving dress, a hand-me-down from one of the other girls, was a garish red with black trim, cut lower than anything she'd ever worn. Jenny, a freckle-faced girl hardly out of her teens, had helped adjust it to fit Sophia's slimmer frame. "It ain't so bad once you get used to it," Jenny offered, showing Sophia how to balance a tray of drinks. "Just keep moving and don't make eye contact too long with nobody. That encourages 'em." Encouraged or not, the minors needed little invitation to make their interests known. Sophia's first circuit of the room was a baptism by fire. Wandering hands, lewd comments, and frankly appraising stares that made her skin crawl. She flinched when a bearded miner slapped her backside, nearly spilling her tray of whiskeys. "Straighten up, smile, keep walking," she muttered to herself. "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." Poetry became her shield as the evening progressed. She recited Keats in her mind while delivering drinks to a table of card players, Elizabeth Barrett Browning while filling orders at the bar, Shakespeare while dodging the persistent attentions of a one-eyed man who seemed determined to pull her onto his lap. "Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date." She whispered the words like a talisman as she collected empty glasses, the familiar rhythm steadying her nerves. Shortly before 9 o'clock, the swinging doors parted and a curious hush fell over the saloon. The blacksmith from across the street stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal dark hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. Even in the smoky dimness, Sophia could see that his eyes matched his hair, nearly black, observant, missing nothing. Unlike the other men, who arrived in boisterous groups or initiated immediate conversation, he moved with quiet purpose to a corner table. Madame Rosa nodded to him from her position near the bar, a gesture of respect rather than her usual calculated welcome. "Take his order," Jenny hissed, nudging Sophia. "That's Caleb Reeves. Comes in twice a week, never causes trouble, tips well. Madame Rosa likes him." Sophia approached his table, oddly self-conscious under his steady gaze. Close up, she could see that his face was all angles and planes, like something carved from mahogany. A scar ran along his jawline, partially hidden by his beard. His hands, resting on the table, bore the marks of his trade, calloused, powerful, yet unexpectedly clean. "What can I bring you, sir?" she asked, pleased that her voice remained steady. "Whiskey. The good bottle Madame Rosa keeps for people who can taste the difference." His voice was deep, with an unexpected gentleness that contrasted with his imposing appearance. When Sophia returned with his drink, he looked up, truly seeing her for the first time. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, perhaps? Though they'd never formally met. "You're new," he said simply. "Yes, first night." He nodded, placing a coin on her tray, far more than the drink warranted. "Sir, this is too much." "It's not." His tone brooked no argument. He didn't look at her again, seemingly content to nurse his whiskey in solitude. The evening wore on and Sophia's feet ached abominably in her too tight boots. The smoke made her eyes water and her cheeks hurt from maintaining a wooden smile. She had just delivered a fresh round to a table of increasingly rowdy miners when a meaty hand clamped around her wrist. "Sit a spell, pretty lady," slurred a red-faced man with a wild tangle of beard. "Get to know Barney a little better." "Thank you, but I have orders to deliver," Sophia replied, trying to extract her wrist from his grip. His fingers tightened painfully. "Wasn't askin', was tellin'. Need some company and you'll do fine. Please release me, sir." She kept her voice low, remembering Madame Rosa's instructions not to create scenes. "Give us a kiss first." He yanked her closer, his whiskey-houred breath hot on her face. The lady said no. Sophia hadn't noticed the blacksmith's approach. One moment she was struggling against Barney's grip. The next she was free, stumbling back as Caleb Reeves twisted the miner's arm with surgical precision. Barney howled, his face contorting in pain. "You're breaking my arm, Reeves." "Not yet." Caleb's tone remained conversational, though his eyes had hardened to obsidian. "But I will if you ever touch her, or any woman, without permission again. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear. Lego, for God's sake." Caleb released him and Barney slunk away, cradling his arm and muttering obscenities. The potential altercation had drawn attention, but to Sophia's relief, it dispersed quickly as the piano player launched into a particularly rollicking tune. Caleb turned to her, concern replacing the cold fury that had transformed his features moments before. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" "No. Thank you." She rubbed her wrist, certain it would bruise by morning. He studied her face, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small tin. "Salve, for the bruising. Works on horses, works on people." Despite everything, Sophia found herself smiling at his matter-of-fact delivery. "Do you often medicate your clientele, Mr. Reeves?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "Only the ones who remind me there's still civilization worth defending." Before she could respond, he touched the brim of his hat. "Caleb Reeves, my shop's across the street if you need anything fixed." His gaze dropped briefly to the watch chain visible at her waistband. "Timepieces included." With that, he turned and left, moving through the crowd with the same quiet purpose with which he'd arrived. The entire saloon seemed dimmer in his absence, though Sophia told herself it was merely a trick of the smoky light. Madame Rosa appeared at her elbow. "Well, it seems you've survived your first night and caught the attention of our resident knight in sooty armor." He was simply being kind. "Caleb Reeves isn't simply anything, my dear." The older woman's eyes held a knowing gleam. "That man measures every word like gold dust. If he spoke to you, he had reason." She patted Sophia's shoulder in a surprisingly maternal gesture. "Take 15 minutes in the back room. There's cold water for your wrist, then finish your shift. The worst crowds are gone now." As Sophia made her way to the back room, she realized she was still holding the small tin of salve. Like the blacksmith himself, it was unassuming but promised unexpected comfort. She slipped it into her pocket, a small talisman against the night's remaining hours. Sophia climbed the hotel stairs, each step a testimony to muscles she hadn't known existed until they began protesting. Her feet throbbed in perfect harmony with the pulse of her bruised wrist. The 10-hour shift at the Silver Dollar had earned her precisely 63 cents in tips, a fortune compared to the nothing she'd had that morning, but a pittance measured against her Boston past. She unlocked her door with fingers that trembled from exhaustion, not bothering to light the lamp as she sank onto the narrow bed. Moonlight streamed through the threadbare curtains, casting silver patterns across the faded wallpaper. For long moments she sat, unmoving, letting the silence wash over her after hours of cacophony. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed thunderous in the quiet room. With slow, deliberate movements, she removed her borrowed serving dress, folding it neatly despite her desire to fling the garish thing across the room. Her chemise and petticoats were damp with perspiration, clinging to her body in the stuffy room. "One day at a time," she murmured, repeating the mantra that had sustained her through the journey west. Just one day at a time. She washed as best she could with the tepid water in the cracked pitcher, then donned her cotton nightgown, its familiar softness a small comfort. Only then did she allow herself to examine her wrist by the moonlight. The skin had already darkened to an angry purple where Barney's fingers had dug in. Remembering, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the small tin Caleb Reeves had given her. She opened it, releasing the scent of beeswax, camphor, and something herbal she couldn't identify. The salve was cool against her fingertips as she smoothed it gently over the bruise. "Works on horses, works on people," she quoted with a tired smile. The blacksmith's gruff kindness seemed all the more precious in contrast to the evening's indignities. Her gaze fell upon Charles's watch, lying on the nightstand where she'd placed it that morning. The gold case gleamed dully in the moonlight, still handsome despite the scratches that marred its once pristine surface. Much like her life, she reflected wryly. She picked it up, testing the weight in her palm. The irregular ticking had worsened, stuttering like an old man's labored breathing. Caleb Reeves had offered to look at it, but something made her hesitate to surrender this last link to her former life to a stranger's care. "Let's see what ails you," she murmured, retrieving a hairpin from her discarded coiffure. Sophia held the watch close to the window, using the moonlight to examine its workings. Her father had possessed an engineer's fascination with mechanical objects, often dismantling and reassembling the household timepieces to her mother's despair. Many an afternoon she had sat at his elbow, absorbing his impromptu lessons. She inserted the hairpin carefully, probing the mechanism with delicate precision. Something caught, resistant to her gentle pressure. There was a soft click, but not the sound of gears engaging as she'd expected. To her astonishment, the back panel of the watch case slid sideways, revealing a hidden compartment. "What on earth?" Sophia's fingers trembled as she extracted a tightly folded square of paper from the concealed space. The yellowed parchment crackled as she carefully unfolded it, edges worn thin from repeated handling. It was a map, crude but deliberate in its creation. Mountain ranges sketched in faded ink framed a winding path marked with curious symbols. Her eyes widened as she made out the words inscribed in Charles's elegant hand at the bottom corner. "Dutchman's treasure. Verified March 1871. March 1871. 3 months before his death. Charles had never mentioned any treasure, any map. Yet he had carried it hidden in his watch, the very watch he had insisted she keep if anything happened to him. Her mind raced. Charles had gambled away her dowry, left her with crushing debt. Yet he might have possessed knowledge of a treasure? It made no sense. Unless he had never intended for her to benefit from it. A chill ran down her spine. What exactly had been the true circumstances of Charles's death? The official report cited a mining accident, but she had received few details, being informed only after he was already buried in some nameless western grave. Sophia refolded the map with care, slipping it back into its hiding place. The watch case closed with another faint click, resuming its appearance of ordinary, if somewhat battered, timepiece. Tomorrow, she decided, she would pay a visit to Caleb Reeves's blacksmith shop. Not just for repairs to the watch, though that provided a convenient excuse, but because something in those dark, observant eyes had suggested knowledge of Silverado, of mining, and just possibly of Charles Fairbank. She curled beneath the thin blanket, Charles's watch clutched in her palm, its irregular ticking a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Sleep, when it finally came, was populated with dreams of mountains that shifted like living creatures and dark-eyed blacksmiths who spoke in riddles. Chapter 2. Fire and Iron. Morning sunlight spilled across Silverado's dusty main street, burning away the night's chill with remarkable efficiency. Sophia smoothed her hands over her best remaining dress, a serviceable gray cotton with minimal adornment, and squared her shoulders as she approached the blacksmith shop. Though her appearance was far from what she would have considered presentable in Boston, she had managed a reasonable approximation of respectability, her hair neatly coiled at her nape and Charles's watch chain discreetly visible at her waist. The rhythmic clanging of metal on metal grew louder as she approached. The shop stood open to the street, more a covered work area than a proper building, with a stone forge glowing red-hot at its center. Caleb Reeves stood with his back to her, one powerful arm swinging a hammer in an arc that connected with glowing metal held steady by iron tongs in his other hand. With each blow, sparks erupted like angry fireflies, briefly illuminating the shadowed corners of the workspace before dying on the packed dirt floor. Sophia paused at the threshold, transfixed. There was a primal beauty to the scene. Man harnessing fire, bending metal to his will through sheer strength and skill. Unlike the uncontrolled violence of the saloon, this was power with purpose. Destruction in service of creation. Caleb's shirt clung to his broad back, darkened with sweat despite the early hour. His movements flowed with practiced precision, each blow of the hammer deliberate yet somehow graceful. He paused, examined his work with a critical eye, then thrust the metal back into the forge, pumping the bellows to feed the flames. Muscles rippled across his shoulders as the fire blazed brighter. Only then did he seem to sense her presence, turning with a startled expression that quickly settled into something more guarded. "Mrs. Fairbank." He set down his tools and wiped his hands on his leather apron. "What can I do for you?" Up close, his face was even more striking than she remembered. The strong line of his jaw contrasted with surprisingly gentle eyes, their darkness softened by amber flecks visible in the morning light. A smudge of soot marked his right cheekbone, humanizing what might otherwise have been intimidating perfection. Sophia suddenly realized she'd been staring. Heat that had nothing to do with the forge climbed her neck. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves. I hope I'm not interrupting your work." She stepped forward, withdrawing Charles' watch from her pocket. "You offered to look at timepieces. This one seems to have developed a stutter." His expression remained neutral, but something in his posture eased slightly. "No interruption. I needed to let that piece cool anyway." He gestured toward a workbench set against the far wall. "We can use better light over here." The bench was surprisingly orderly, an array of tools arranged with military precision, files, pliers, small hammers, and implements she couldn't name. A mug of coffee, gone cold judging by the film on its surface, sat precariously close to a leather-bound ledger. Sophia noted with interest that the handwriting visible on the open page was elegant and precise, at odds with the calloused hands that produced it. Caleb cleared a space, setting aside a half-finished horseshoe. "May I?" He extended his hand for the watch. She hesitated only briefly before placing it in his palm, acutely aware of the secret it contained. "The mechanism seems to catch, it loses time." "Common enough problem. Dust gets in, oil dries out." He pulled a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles from his apron pocket and perched them on his nose, transforming his appearance from rugged craftsman to scholar in an instant. Using a small tool that resembled a miniature screwdriver, he deftly opened the watch case. Sophia held her breath, but the hidden compartment remained secure. Caleb's broad fingers proved surprisingly delicate as he manipulated the tiny gears, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You have experience with watchmaking?" she asked, partly from genuine curiosity, partly to distract herself from the inexplicable flutter in her stomach as she watched him work. "Some. My father was a tinker, traveled through Appalachia fixing whatever needed fixing, clocks, watches, pots, knives." His focus remained on the timepiece. "Taught me that understanding small mechanisms helps with large ones. A watch is just a miniature machine." As he adjusted the position of the watch to catch better light, his sleeve pulled back, revealing a jagged scar that ran from his wrist upward, disappearing beneath rolled shirt sleeve. The puckered flesh suggested a wound that had healed without proper medical attention. Sophia couldn't help staring. Caleb glanced up, following her gaze to the scar. "Mining accident," he said flatly, before she could ask. He tugged his sleeve down in a gesture that seemed more habitual than self-conscious. "I apologize. I didn't mean to be rude." "Nothing rude about curiosity." He returned his attention to the watch, but something in his tone suggested the subject was closed. Sophia watched as he cleaned a tiny gear with a rag so soft it might have been silk, then applied a drop of oil from a small brass container. His gentleness with the delicate mechanism stood in stark contrast to the raw power she'd witnessed as he'd hammered red-hot iron. The contradiction fascinated her. "This is fine craftsmanship," he commented. "Swiss-made, not something you see often out here." "It was my wedding gift to my husband." Caleb tilted the watch, angling it toward the light, and froze. His expression changed so subtly that Sophia might have missed it had she not been watching him so intently. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps? Or more troublingly, guilt. "Charles Fairbank," he read from the engraving inside the case, his voice carefully neutral. "This belonged to Charles Fairbank." Sophia's pulse quickened. "Yes, my late husband." Caleb's fingers stilled on the mechanism. For a heartbeat that stretched to eternity, his eyes met hers, and Sophia felt certain he was weighing his words with the same precision he applied to measuring iron for his forge. "Did you know him?" she asked, unable to bear the silence. He turned back to the watch, feigning absorption in his task. "Many pass through Silverado. Mining towns attract all sorts." It wasn't an answer, yet it told her everything. Caleb Reeves had known Charles, and the knowledge was not pleasant to him. Before she could press further, his index finger caught on something within the watch's inner workings. There was a soft click, and to Sophia's horror, the secret compartment slid open, revealing a corner of the yellowed map. Caleb's eyebrows rose above the rims of his spectacles. "What's this?" Instinctively, Sophia reached for the watch, but Caleb had already extracted the folded paper. His expression shifted from surprise to something more complex as he carefully unfolded the map, taking in the crude drawings and faded handwriting. "Where did you get this?" The casual tone was gone, replaced by intensity that sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "It was in the watch." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Which belongs to me." A muscle worked in Caleb's jaw. "Do you know what this is?" "A map, obviously." "Not just any map." He glanced toward the open front of the shop, then lowered his voice. "This is a map to the Lost Dutchman's mine." Sophia frowned. "The what?" 5 years ago, a German prospector came through these parts. Called himself the Dutchman. Most folks here can't tell German from Dutch. Caleb carefully refolded the map. Story goes he found the richest silver vein in the territory, made one trip to the assay office with samples that nearly caused a riot, then disappeared. Some say he died in the mountains. Others say he went back east with enough wealth to live like a king. And you believe this fairy tale? Caleb's eyes narrowed. I've seen the assay reports. The silver was real enough, nearly pure, unheard of. An uncomfortable suspicion formed in Sophia's mind. And my husband had a map to this mythical mine? Appears so. Caleb handed the map back to her with visible reluctance. Question is, how did Charles Fairbank get his hands on it? The Dutchman wasn't known for sharing. Sophia tucked the map back into the watch's secret compartment. I wouldn't know. Charles never mentioned any mine or map to me. Convenient. The word hung between them, loaded with implication. Sophia felt her cheeks warm with indignation. I beg your pardon? Caleb replaced his tools with deliberate care. I mean no offense, Mrs. Fairbank, but treasure maps have a way of bringing out the worst in people. Men have died for less? Are you suggesting my husband? I'm suggesting nothing. He closed the watch case with a decisive snap. The mechanism should work properly now. Oil and cleaning, that's all it needed. He held the watch out to her, and she took it, careful not to let their fingers touch. The brief camaraderie they'd shared at the Silver Dollar seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a tension she couldn't fully understand. What do I owe you? She asked stiffly. Nothing. His expression softened fractionally. Considerate payment for livening up the Silver Dollar last night. Barney Wade needed taking down a peg. Despite herself, Sophia smiled. In that case, thank you. Caleb nodded, removing his spectacles and returning them to his pocket. The scholar vanished, leaving the blacksmith in his place. Word of advice, Mrs. Fairbank? That map? Keep it hidden. Silverado has a way of making secrets public knowledge, and not everyone would return it so easily. Why did you? The question escaped before she could reconsider it. Caleb turned back to his forge, pumping the bellows until the coals glowed orange. In the reflected light, his profile might have been carved from the mountains themselves. Some things even silver can't buy, he said finally, a clear conscience being one of them. Before Sophia could respond, he retrieved his hammer and tongs. The conversation was clearly over. She pocketed the watch, nodding her thanks even though his back was turned, and made her way toward the street. She had almost reached the doorway when his voice stopped her. Mrs. Fairbank, she turned. Caleb stood silhouetted against the forge fire, his expression unreadable. Your husband. How did he die? The unexpected question caught her off guard. Mining accident near Boulder City. At least, that's what I was told. Caleb nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. I'm sorry for your loss. But as Sophia stepped into the morning sunlight, she couldn't shake the feeling that there had been no surprise in his eyes, only confirmation of something he'd already known. The yellowed parchment lay exposed on Caleb's workbench, seemingly innocent despite the sudden tension crackling in the air. Sophia held her breath as the blacksmith's entire demeanor transformed. The casual competence replaced by an electric intensity that made the hair on her arms stand on end. Where did you get this? The urgency in his voice matched the tautness of his shoulders. Sophia found herself taking an instinctive step backward. It was hidden in the watch, as you can see. I only discovered it last night. Caleb's hands, so steady with hammer and tongs, trembled slightly as he traced the faded lines on the map. His index finger followed a winding path between crude renderings of mountain peaks, pausing at symbols scrawled in the margins. Spanish arrastras? He murmured, seemingly to himself. Water source. Quartz outcropping with silver inclusions. His finger stopped at a crudely drawn X, nestled in what appeared to be a box canyon. This is it. This has to be it. Be what exactly? Sophia asked, finding her voice. Caleb glanced up, as if startled to find her still standing there. The lost Dutchman's mine. I told you the story, but I didn't tell you how many men have died searching for it. His eyes dropped back to the map. Claim jumpers, greedy partners, accidents, and some say the Dutchman himself guards it from the grave. Despite the forge's heat, a chill skittered down Sophia's spine. The reverent way he touched the parchment reminded her of a priest handling sacred relics. Superstitious nonsense, she said, more firmly than she felt. It's just a piece of paper that may or may not lead to anything of value. If this is genuine, Mrs. Fairbank, it's worth more than this entire town, more than most of the territory. He looked up, his dark eyes intense beneath furrowed brows. Your husband? Did he ever mention the Dutchman? Or a claim he'd found? Something in his tone made her hesitate. Charles had kept many secrets. The map was evidence enough of that. But Caleb Reeves seemed to be probing for specific information, as if testing her knowledge against some private understanding. No. She reached for the map. He mentioned neither. As her fingers contacted the parchment, Caleb's hand closed gently but firmly around her wrist. Unlike Barney's bruising grip the night before, his touch was careful, almost apologetic, yet unyielding. Do you know what this means? His voice dropped lower, his eyes darting toward the open shop front. If real, and these landmarks suggest it is, you're holding a fortune in your hands. A fortune others would kill for. Sophia met his gaze steadily, despite the fluttering pulse he must have felt beneath his fingers. Then it seems I should be very careful who I trust with its existence, doesn't it, Mr. Reeves? Something flickered in his expression. Respect, perhaps? Though shadowed by wariness, his fingers released her wrist, though she could still feel the imprint of his touch like a heated brand. Yes, ma'am, you should. He folded the map with meticulous care, returning it to the secret compartment with a deft movement. The watch case clicked shut, once again concealing its prize, starting with keeping it hidden from view in a town where walls have ears and windows have eyes. He placed the watch in her palm, his expression grave. Whatever you decide to do with that, Mrs. Fairbank, do it carefully. Men show their true colors when silver whispers to them. The silver dollar roared with Thursday night revelry, miners flush with the week's wages determined to drink away their aches and sorrows. Sophia balanced a loaded tray as she wove between crowded tables, mechanically taking orders and delivering drinks. Her body moved through the familiar patterns established over the past few days, but her mind circled endlessly around the map and Caleb's warning, a fortune hidden in mountains she'd never explored, a treasure that had allegedly claimed lives, and a mysterious blacksmith who seemed to know more about her late husband than he was willing to reveal. She delivered 3 whiskeys to a table of card players, automatically sidestepping a miner's wandering hand. The watch hung heavy at her waist, its newly repaired mechanism ticking with perfect regularity, as if mocking the erratic rhythm of her thoughts. The saloon's batwing doors swung open, and Sophia's pulse leapt traitorously as Caleb Reeves stepped inside. Unlike the morning, when sweat and soot had marked his working attire, he had clearly made an effort to clean himself up. His hair was damp at the edges, his shirt fresh, though the same worn leather vest covered his broad shoulders. She noted, with inexplicable satisfaction, that he'd missed a smudge of soot behind his left ear. As always, he nodded politely to Madame Rosa before claiming his usual corner table. His eyes found Sophia immediately, tracking her movements with an intensity that felt almost physical. When she delivered his usual whiskey, he accepted it with a murmured thanks, but offered no conversation. An hour later, when Jenny nudged her toward the back room, Sophia realized she'd been granted her customary 15-minute respite. She removed her serving apron gratefully, splashing water on her flushed face before gathering her courage. Caleb glanced up as she approached his table, his expression carefully neutral as she slid into the chair across from him. "You're off duty?" he asked. "For 15 minutes. She met his gaze directly. "Long enough for a business proposition." His eyebrows rose fractionally, but he merely gestured for her to continue, taking a measured sip of his whiskey. "I need money to leave Silverado," she began, keeping her voice low. "Enough to start fresh somewhere civilized. You know the terrain. What if we looked for the mine together? Equal partners." For several heartbeats, Caleb's expression remained perfectly still, as if carved from the same stone as his forge. Then he set his glass down with deliberate care. "You don't know what you're asking." His voice was rough-edged, like iron before polishing. "Mining isn't for Boston ladies. It's dangerous, brutal work, even for those born to it." "I'm not a Boston lady anymore." Sophia reached up, removing a hairpin to secure a loose strand of hair that had escaped its coil. The practiced, efficient movement conveyed more about her practical adaptation than words could have. I'm a woman with nothing to lose. Something shifted in Caleb's eyes. Reluctant admiration, warring with stubborn caution. You have your reputation, your safety, possibly your life. My reputation? A bitter laugh escaped before she could contain it. I serve whiskey to men who see me as nothing more than flesh to be purchased. My safety? She extended her wrist, where faint bruises still marked Barney's attack. That's a daily gamble, regardless of my choices. As for my life, she leaned forward, lowering her voice further. A slow death serving drinks until I'm too old or too broken seems worse than risking something meaningful. Caleb studied her face with unsettling thoroughness, as if cataloging every line, every shadow, every fleck of determination in her eyes. Finally, he shook his head, though without the dismissal she'd expected. You remind me of someone I knew once. Same fire. His mouth twisted in what might have been a smile or grimace. Didn't end well for her. I'm not her, Sophia replied simply. He took another sip of whiskey, then set the glass down with an air of decision. If, and I emphasize if, I were to consider this madness, we'd need supplies. Pack animals. Weapons. He ticked the items off on calloused fingers. Maybe 2 weeks' provisions to start. The map shows landmarks that match the eastern slopes of the Superstition Mountains. That's hard country. Hope unfurled in Sophia's chest, but she kept her expression composed. How much? More than you've got, I'd wager. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I've been putting aside for a larger smithy. Might cover most of what we'd need. You'd invest your savings in this venture. Sophia couldn't hide her surprise. Something dark flickered across his features. Let's just say I have my reasons for being interested in the Dutchman's mine. He leaned forward, voice dropping to little more than a whisper. But understand this. If we do this, we do it my way. When I say jump, you don't ask why. You just jump. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes or hesitation. The intensity in his eyes should have frightened her. Instead, Sophia felt a curious thrill, as if standing at the edge of a great precipice, knowing she was about to step into empty air. Agreed, she said, extending her hand as she'd seen businessmen do. After a moment's hesitation, Caleb's large hand enveloped hers. His palm was warm, the calluses evidence of honest labor, so unlike Charles's soft, manicured fingers. This was a hand that built rather than destroyed, that created rather than gambled away. We leave at first light next Wednesday, he said, releasing her hand. Gives me time to finish outstanding work and make arrangements without raising suspicions. Tell Madame Rosa you've found a position as housekeeper for a widow outside town. Should buy us a few weeks before anyone starts asking questions. Sophia nodded, rising as Jenny signaled frantically from the bar. Her 15 minutes had expired. Mr. Reeves, she said, struck by a sudden thought. Why are you agreeing to this? You could search for the mine yourself now that you've seen the map. Caleb's eyes held hers, and for an instant she glimpsed something beneath the guarded surface. A flash of old pain, of guilt, perhaps even of hope. Some debts can't be paid with money, Mrs. Fairbank. He raised his glass in a mock toast. And some treasures aren't silver or gold. As Sophia returned to her duties, she wondered what sort of debt Caleb Reeves believed he owed, and why she suspected it had everything to do with a husband she was beginning to realize she'd never truly known. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor washes of pink and gold as Sophia made her way to the appointed meeting place. The air held the peculiar crispness that preceded desert heat, carrying scents of sage and dust. Silverado slumbered behind her, its saloons finally silent after a night of revelry, its decent folk not yet risen to begin the day's labors. Caleb waited at the edge of town, a dark silhouette against the brightening horizon. 2 horses and a heavily laden pack mule stood ground-tied nearby, occasional snorts of impatience punctuating the morning stillness. As Sophia approached, Caleb glanced up from checking a leather strap on one of the saddlebags, his expression shifting from concentration to momentary surprise. She knew what had caused his reaction. Instead of the modest traveling dress he likely expected, she wore divided riding skirts of practical brown twill, a crisp shirtwaist, and sturdy boots. Her hair had been tightly braided and wound into a coronet that would fit neatly beneath the wide-brimmed hat she carried. The outfit had cost her nearly all her earnings from the silver dollar, but proper attire for the journey seemed a more sensible investment than skirts that would wear through within days. "Good morning, Mr. Reeves," she said, setting down her small valise. "I trust I haven't kept you waiting?" Caleb's eyes traveled from her practical attire to her face, his expression unreadable in the half-light. "No, ma'am, you're right on time." He gestured toward the chestnut mare standing patiently nearby. "That's Penny. She's steady and sure-footed. Should suit you." Sophia approached the mare, offering her palm for inspection. The horse's velvet muzzle tickled her skin as Penny sniffed delicately, then nudged her hand in search of treats. "We're going to be friends, I think," Sophia murmured, stroking the horse's neck. She turned to find Caleb watching her with that same unreadable expression. "You've ridden before?" he observed. It wasn't a question. My father believed women should know how to ride properly. She adjusted her hat, securing it with a hat pin. He considered side saddles an abomination, designed to cripple women while preserving meaningless propriety. The corner of Caleb's mouth twitched, in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Smart man." "He was," Sophia agreed, a pang of old grief softening her voice. "Though Boston society considered him scandalously progressive." Caleb nodded toward her divided skirts. "Those will serve you better than fancy dresses where we're going." "I assumed as much." She moved to check Penny's saddle, running her hands over the leather with practiced efficiency. "This isn't a pleasure ride," Caleb warned, coming to stand beside her. "Let me show you how to check the cinch properly. Desert riding is different from Boston bridle paths." His arms reached around her, demonstrating the proper technique for testing the saddle's security. The morning air seemed suddenly inadequate as his chest briefly pressed against her back, his breath warm against her ear as he explained the importance of a secure but not over-tightened girth. "You want to slip 2 fingers under, just so," he demonstrated, his calloused fingers brushing against hers as she attempted to mimic his technique. Both pulled back as if burned, a current of awareness crackling between them like static electricity before a storm. Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the dim light that concealed her reaction. Caleb cleared his throat, stepping back to a more proper distance. "You'll want to check it again after we've ridden a mile or so," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Horses are clever about holding their breath during saddling." "Like women holding their breath to lace corsets," Sophia remarked before thinking. Caleb's eyebrows rose, and for a moment she feared she'd scandalized him with such an intimate reference. Then a genuine smile transformed his solemn features, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek that she found inexplicably charming. "I imagine there are similarities," he conceded, the warmth in his eyes lingering a moment before he turned to his own mount, a rangy black gelding with a white blaze. "This is Thunder." Don't let his size fool you. He's gentle as a lamb unless provoked. "Rather like his owner." The words slipped out before she could reconsider them. Caleb paused in the act of mounting, giving her a measured look over his horse's back. "Ma'am, anyone who's seen me swing a hammer would know better than to call me gentle." "Anyone who's seen you repair a watch would know better than to call you anything else," she countered, gathering Penny's reins. For a heartbeat, something unguarded flashed across Caleb's face. Surprise, perhaps, at being truly seen. Then the mask of practicality returned as he swung into the saddle with fluid grace. "We should get moving if we want to make the first water stop by midday," Sophia mounted, with equal competence, adjusting her skirts and settling into the saddle. As she gathered the reins, a movement caught her attention. On the porch of the Silver Dollar, Madame Rosa stood watching, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. The saloon owner raised a hand in silent farewell, her lips curved in a knowing smile that made Sophia wonder exactly how much the woman had guessed about their expedition. Caleb noticed the direction of her gaze and touched his hat brim in acknowledgement to Madame Rosa. "That woman doesn't miss much," he commented as they urged their horses forward. "But she keeps her own counsel. Rare quality in these parts." As they left Silverado behind, Sophia found herself looking back only once at the ramshackle collection of buildings that had briefly been her home. The rising sun glinted off distant windows, transforming the humble settlement into something almost magical, a mirage that would vanish with full daylight. Ahead lay the mountains, their purple shadows promising both danger and possibility. Beside her rode a man she barely knew yet had entrusted with her future. Sophia faced forward, squaring her shoulders as Penny's steady gait carried her toward whatever fate awaited. The day had taught Sophia new definitions of discomfort. Despite her prior riding experience, 8 hours in the saddle, traversing rocky slopes and dry creek beds, had discovered muscles she hadn't known existed. As she huddled near the small campfire, she tried to massage feeling back into her thighs without drawing attention to her distress. Across the flames, Caleb arranged coffee in tin plates with the efficiency of long practice. He had spoken little during their journey, offering occasional warnings about terrain or brief explanations of landmarks. Now, as darkness enveloped their small camp, the silence felt heavier somehow, more intimate. The fire popped and crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward to join the emerging stars. When Caleb silently extended a tin cup toward her, Sophia accepted it gratefully, expecting coffee. The sharp scent of whiskey met her nostrils instead. For the pain, he explained, noting her surprise. Trail riding uses different muscles than pleasure riding. Sophia took a cautious sip, managing not to cough as the liquor burned a path down her throat. Thank you. Is it that obvious? You've hidden it well, he allowed, the firelight emphasizing the strong planes of his face. But I noticed you favoring your right side the last mile or so. Embarrassed that he'd observed her weakness, Sophia took another larger swallow of whiskey. I'll adjust. My father always said discomfort was the price of adventure. Your father sounds like an unusual man, especially for Boston society. He was. The whiskey loosened her tongue, warming her from within. He made his fortune in shipping, but never forgot he began as a dock worker. He believed in education for everyone, including his daughter. Especially his daughter after my mother died. Caleb nodded, sipping his own whiskey as he added another small branch to the fire. My father was similar in some ways. Believed knowledge was the only thing no one could take from you. The casual revelation of personal information surprised her. Throughout their journey, Caleb had deflected most of her attempts at conversation beyond the practicalities of their expedition. Seizing the opportunity, Sophia asked, "Will you show me how to read the map properly? If we're partners, I should understand where we're going." After a moment's hesitation, Caleb withdrew the folded parchment from his shirt pocket. He smoothed it carefully on the ground between them, anchoring the corners with small stones. Sophia moved closer, leaning forward to see the faded markings in the flickering firelight. Here's where we are now, Caleb said, his finger indicating a spot near a crude drawing of what might be a mesa. Tomorrow we'll reach this creek. Usually dry this time of year, but there's a spring nearby where we can refill our canteens. His finger traced their route, explaining terrain features and potential challenges with a thoroughness that confirmed his intimate knowledge of the region. Sophia found herself fascinated not just by the information, but by the transformation in his demeanor. When speaking of the land, Caleb's customary reserve melted away, replaced by genuine passion. The Dutchman supposedly followed this ridge, he continued, before descending into what he called God's Anvil, likely this box canyon. How far altogether, she asked, leaning closer still to examine the location he indicated. 4, maybe 5 more days if the weather holds and we don't encounter any complications. His hesitation on the last word reminded her of the dangers he'd mentioned. Claim jumpers, accidents, perhaps even the Dutchman's ghost. As if in response to this thought, the night wind gusted suddenly, sending a chill through her thin shirtwaist. Sophia shivered involuntarily. Without comment, Caleb rose and retrieved a woolen blanket from his bedroll. With awkward gentleness, he wrapped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering briefly before he withdrew to his side of the fire. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the blanket closer. It carried his scent, leather, wood smoke, and something distinctly male that she found oddly comforting. Their eyes met across the dancing flames, and for a moment neither looked away. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a softening, a question, an acknowledgement of something neither was prepared to name. Then he broke the connection, returning his attention to the map with deliberate focus. "You should get some sleep, Mrs. Fairbank. Dawn comes early in these mountains, and tomorrow's climb is steeper." "Sophia," she corrected gently. "If we're to be partners, you should use my name." He glanced up, firelight catching the amber flecks in his dark eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might refuse, maintaining the formal distance that propriety demanded between a widow and an unmarried man alone in the wilderness. Then he nodded once, definitively. "Sophia." He spoke her name carefully, as if testing the weight and feel of it on his tongue. The simple sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected flutter through her chest, like startled birds taking wing. She clutched the blanket tighter, suddenly certain that this journey would change her in ways that had nothing to do with treasure or silver mines. "Good night, Caleb," she replied, using his given name for the first time. His slight intake of breath told her he'd noticed the liberty and had not found it unwelcome. As Sophia settled into her bedroll, the vast canopy of stars wheeling overhead, she wondered what her proper Boston friends would think of her now, sleeping on the ground in the company of a man who was neither relative nor husband, pursuing a treasure that might not exist. For the first time since Charles's death, the thought brought not shame but a curious sense of freedom. Whatever awaited in the mountains ahead, she had chosen this path willingly, with open eyes. That knowledge, like the blanket still carrying Caleb's scent, wrapped around her as she drifted toward sleep. Chapter 3. Earth and Stone. 3 days into their journey, the landscape had transformed from the familiar scrubland surrounding Silverado to a rugged terrain of jutting rock formations and hidden valleys. The May sun beat down with increasing intensity as morning progressed, though the higher elevation kept the heat less punishing than in the plains below. Sophia's skin had bronzed, despite her wide-brimmed hat, and her hands bore calluses that would have horrified her Boston seamstress. She guided Penny along a narrow trail, following Caleb's lead as he navigated what appeared to her untrained eye to be trackless wilderness. He had grown more talkative with each passing day, though his conversation remained largely practical, instructions, warnings, and increasingly lessons about the land they traversed. "See those leaves?" Caleb reined thunder to a halt, pointing toward a cluster of pale green growth tucked against a north-facing escarpment. "Desert mallow. Always grows near underground water. Useful to know if your canteen runs dry." Sophia studied the plant, committing its distinctive shape to memory. "And those red flowers we passed earlier?" "Indian paintbrush. No practical use that I know of, except to remind you that beauty survives even in harsh places." He glanced at her, then quickly away, as if regretting the almost poetic observation. They continued along the trail, Caleb occasionally pointing out other markers, certain rock formations that indicated possible shelter, the subtle depression of game trails that might lead to water, the droppings that revealed which animals had recently passed. "How did you learn all this?" Sophia asked as they paused to rest the horses in a patch of shade. "It seems like knowledge that would take a lifetime to acquire." Caleb unscrewed his canteen, taking a measured sip before answering. "Some from my father. More from an old Shoshone who took pity on a green Easterner about to get himself killed. The rest," he shrugged. "Experience is an effective teacher, if harsh, and expensive if one survives to pay the bill," Sophia added, remembering her father's favorite saying. A hint of smile touched Caleb's mouth. "Your father sounds like a man I would have enjoyed meeting. He would have liked you as well. He had no patience for pretension, but great respect for practical knowledge." She adjusted her hat, brushing away a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. "Is that why you became a blacksmith? It seems very different from mining." Caleb's expression closed slightly, but before he could answer, a dry, sinister rattle broke the stillness. Penny reared, ears flattened in alarm as a coiled rattlesnake vibrated its warning less than 3 feet from her front hooves. Sophia tightened her grip on the reins instinctively, but the sudden movement only agitated the horse further. As Penny danced sideways, threatening to bolt, Caleb's hand shot out, grasping the bridle with calm efficiency. His voice, when he spoke to the frightened animal, carried the same steady assurance he used at his forge. "Easy, girl, easy now. That's it." His free hand stroked Penny's neck, his touch firm but gentle. "The snake's not interested in you, just warning you away." The horse settled gradually, though her flanks still quivered. Only when Penny stood quietly did Caleb turn his attention to Sophia, his dark eyes assessing. "You all right?" Sophia nodded, heart still hammering against her ribs. "Yes, thank you." With Penny calm, Caleb released the bridle and stepped carefully toward the rattlesnake, which remained coiled defensively. With practiced movements, he used a long stick to encourage the creature away from the trail. The snake retreated reluctantly into a crevice between sun-bleached rocks, its warning rattle gradually fading. "They rarely strike unless cornered," he explained, returning to Thunder. "Most trouble comes from stepping on them accidentally." "You've done this before," she observed, watching him check Penny for any signs of injury, not just blacksmithing. His hands stilled briefly before continuing their methodical examination of the mare's legs. "I came west to mine," he admitted. "Ended up shoeing horses instead." Something in his tone, a careful neutrality that suggested deeper currents, reached Sophia's curiosity, but she recognized the futility of pressing for more. In 3 days of close quarters, she'd learned that Caleb Reeves shared his past in small, carefully measured doses, like precious water rationed in drought. "The horse seems fine," he concluded, straightening. "But we should walk them a bit. There's a stream about a mile ahead where we can rest properly." They continued on foot, leading their mounts through increasingly rocky terrain. As they walked, Caleb resumed his earlier instruction, pointing out a hawk's nest high on a cliff face and explaining how certain rock formations indicated mineral deposits. Sophia listened attentively, storing away information that might one day mean the difference between survival and disaster in this unforgiving land. Yet behind her focused attention, questions multiplied like desert wildflowers after rain. What had transformed a miner into a blacksmith? What connected him to Charles? And most puzzling, what motivated a man who clearly valued his solitude to partner with a near stranger in search of a legendary mine? The stream, when they reached it, proved more substantial than Sophia had expected. A ribbon of clear water winding between moss-covered stones, fed by a spring that bubbled from the base of a limestone outcropping. Cottonwoods provided welcome shade, their leaves whispering in the afternoon breeze like conspirators sharing secrets. "We'll rest here for an hour," Caleb decided, loosening Thunder's cinch. "Let the horses drink and graze. There's good water and grass, and we shouldn't waste it." Sophia removed Penny's bridle, allowing the mare to drink at the stream's edge. She stretched, easing muscles stiffened by hours in the saddle. Despite the physical demands of their journey, she felt strangely invigorated, more present in her own body than she'd been during months of restrictive mourning garb and proper Boston deportment. "The pack mule needs water too," Caleb reminded her, nodding toward the laden animal still standing patiently a few yards away. Sophia approached the mule, a placid brown creature they'd named Bartholomew, and began unloading his burden. The animal had proven reliable, if unexciting, plodding along behind their horses with steady determination. She removed his halter and gestured toward the stream. "Go on, Bart, you've earned it." To her surprise, the mule remained motionless, regarding the flowing water with evident suspicion. "He needs to drink," Caleb said, frowning. "We've got a long afternoon ahead." He approached Bartholomew, taking the lead rope and attempting to coax the animal forward. The mule planted his feet stubbornly, ears flattening with mulish determination. Caleb tugged more firmly, and the mule responded by leaning backward, digging in his hooves. "Blasted creature," Caleb muttered, his patience visibly fraying. "I've never understood how something so docile most of the time can suddenly develop the stubbornness of 10 men. "May I try?" Sophia asked, hiding her amusement at seeing the composed blacksmith bested by the implacable animal. Caleb handed over the lead rope with evident skepticism. "Be my guest, but I warn you, once these creatures make up their minds..." Sophia ignored his caution, approaching Bartholomew with unhurried movements. Instead of pulling on the rope, she stood beside the mule's head, stroking his neck and murmuring in a low, melodic voice. "What's troubling you, Is it the sound of the water, or something you smell?" Her fingers found a spot behind his ear that made the animal lean into her touch. "It's perfectly safe, just cool, lovely water. Wouldn't that feel wonderful after our dusty walk?" As she spoke, her hand moved rhythmically down the mule's neck to his shoulder, her touch firm but gentle. Gradually, she began walking toward the stream, maintaining contact with the animal as she moved. To Caleb's evident astonishment, Bartholomew followed without resistance, placing each hoof with deliberate care until he stood at the water's edge. "There now," Sophia encouraged, still stroking his neck. "See? Nothing to fear." The mule lowered his head cautiously, then began to drink. Caleb approached, his expression somewhere between admiration and disbelief. "How did you manage that?" Sophia couldn't help the small smile of satisfaction that curved her lips. "My grandfather raised horses in Virginia. He believed force never succeeded where patience would serve. Mules especially respond to gentle handling. They're intelligent enough to be suspicious, but sensible enough to be reasoned with." "More sensible than most men I've known," Caleb observed, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. "Considerably more sensible than most of the men I married," Sophia replied without thinking, then blushed as she realized the implication that she'd had multiple husbands. To her relief, Caleb chuckled. A rusty sound, as if seldom used but genuine. "I imagine Charles Fairbank might have benefited from your grandfather's methods of handling stubborn creatures." The casual reference to her late husband, delivered without the usual caution that characterized Caleb's rare mentions of Charles, caught Sophia off guard. She searched his face for signs of the guilt or recognition she'd glimpsed in the blacksmith shop, but found only thoughtful assessment, as if seeing her anew. "You're full of surprises, Sophia Fairbank," he said quietly. "I wonder what other hidden talents you possess." The words themselves were innocent enough, yet something in his tone, a warmth that hadn't been there before, sent a peculiar flutter through her midsection. For a moment, standing beside the murmuring stream with the sun dappling through cottonwood leaves, they were simply a man and a woman, not partners in a pragmatic treasure hunt. Then Bartholomew, having drunk his fill, raised his dripping muzzle and shook his head vigorously, spraying them both with water droplets. The moment dissolved into laughter. Sophia's bright and spontaneous, Caleb's a deeper rumble that seemed to surprise even him. As they dried their faces and prepared to continue their journey, Sophia caught Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, part confusion, part admiration, and something else that made her newly confident in her decision to trust this solitary man with her future. Whatever lay ahead, she was no longer merely Charles Fairbank's widow or Boston society's fallen daughter. In Caleb's assessing gaze, she had glimpsed something infinitely more valuable than silver, recognition of her worth independent of any man's name or protection. She mounted Penny with renewed purpose, her spine straight not from finishing school training, but from growing self-assurance. The Dutchman's mind awaited, and with it, perhaps, a chance to rewrite her story on her own terms. By mid-afternoon, the sky had transformed from clear azure to an ominous slate gray. Clouds built atop the western peaks like great fortresses, dark and forbidding. The air took on that peculiar stillness that precedes violent weather, heavy with moisture and expectation. A distant rumble of thunder echoed through the canyons. Caleb reined in thunder, studying the rapidly darkening horizon with a frown. "Weir's turning faster than I expected." Sophia followed his gaze, noting how quickly the storm clouds advanced across the sky. The temperature had dropped noticeably in the past hour, and a fitful wind tugged at her hat brim. "How bad will it be?" "Desert storms don't mess about," he replied, already turning thunder toward a narrow defile between towering rock walls. "When they come hard and fast. Flash floods can fill these arroyos in minutes." They urged their mounts forward, Caleb leading them through the shadowed canyon with single-minded purpose. The walls rose higher on either side, rust-colored sandstone streaked with minerals that gleamed dully in the fading light. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file, hooves clattering against stone in a nervous rhythm that matched Sophia's quickening pulse. The first fat raindrops struck as they rounded a sharp bend, cold and startling against her heated skin. Caleb pointed to a dark opening in the canyon wall ahead. "There, we need shelter, fast!" They dismounted hastily. Caleb grabbed essentials from the packs while Sophia led the nervous animals toward the cave entrance. The rain intensified with alarming suddenness, no gentle transition but an immediate deluge that drenched them within seconds. By the time they reached the shelter, water already coursed down the canyon in rivulets that joined to form a muddy stream where the dry trail had been moments before. The cave proved smaller than it had appeared from a distance, a shallow depression rather than a true cavern, barely deep enough to accommodate them and their animals. Caleb worked quickly, efficiently, securing the horses near the entrance where they could benefit from some protection, while leaving the deepest part of the shelter for humans and supplies. Sophia wrung water from her sodden braid, shivering as a gust of wind drove rain sideways into their refuge. Her clothing clung uncomfortably to her skin, and her fingers had grown numb with cold. Outside, lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the very mountain. The horses shifted nervously, but Caleb's low, reassuring murmurs kept them from panicking. "We'll wait it out here," he said, spreading a reasonably dry blanket on the stone floor. "These summer storms usually blow through quickly." "Summer? It feels more like November." Sophia's teeth chattered traitorously, belying her attempt at humor. Caleb glanced at her, concern evident in his expression. "You need to get warm." He rummaged through their packs, producing a second blanket that had remained relatively dry in its oilcloth wrapping. With awkward gentleness, he draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you." She clutched the rough wool gratefully, but the shivering continued. Her damp clothing leached away warmth faster than the blanket could provide it. Caleb hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against practicality. Another violent shiver seemed to decide him. With slow, careful movements, as if approaching a skittish colt, he settled beside her on the blanket and tentatively placed his arm around her shoulders. "Body heat," he explained, his voice gruff with embarrassment. "Most efficient way to warm up. Under other circumstances, Sophia might have protested such familiarity, but the solid warmth of him against her chilled side proved too compelling. She found herself leaning into his embrace, drawn to his heat like a flower turning toward sunlight. "I won't tell if you won't," she managed through chattering teeth, attempting to lighten the moment. His chest moved in what might have been a suppressed chuckle. "Your secret's safe with me, Mrs. Fairbank." "Sophia?" she reminded him. "We agreed, remember? Sophia," he conceded, the name sounding rich and somehow different in his deep voice. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the storm's fury outside their small haven. Gradually, warmth returned to Sophia's limbs. She became acutely aware of the steady rise and fall of Caleb's chest, the subtle thudding of his heart that seemed to quicken when she shifted position. His arm remained carefully proper around her shoulders, yet the simple contact felt more intimate than any touch she'd experienced before. Perhaps it was this strange intimacy, or the primal closeness enforced by the storm, that emboldened her to ask the question that had lingered since their departure from Silverado. "Tell me about yourself," Caleb Reeves. "What brought you to Silverado?" She felt him tense slightly, but he didn't withdraw his arm. Outside, rain continued to pound the earth, creating a curtain of water across the cave entrance that isolated them in their small pocket of dryness. It seemed a time for truths with the ordinary world temporarily held at bay. "Not much to tell that would interest a Boston lady," he replied finally. "We've established I'm not much of a Boston lady anymore." She glanced up at his profile, strong and somewhat stern in the dim light, "and I find myself very interested." Caleb was silent for so long that Sophia thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, a sound almost lost beneath a rumble of now distant thunder. "I was born in Pennsylvania, coal country. My father was a tinker, like I told you. My mother died when I was 8. He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Father raised me on the road, traveling from town to town, fixing whatever needed fixing. He taught me metalwork, how to read, how to survive. He sounds like a good man, the best I've known." Something softened in Caleb's voice. "Worked himself to death making sure I had opportunities he never did. Caught pneumonia one winter, wouldn't stop working long enough to recover properly." Sophia felt the echo of her own grief in his words. "I'm sorry. Long time ago now." Caleb shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket more securely around her shoulders. "After he passed, I headed west. Gold fever was running high then. Figured I'd try my luck." "Did you find it? Gold?" A humorless laugh escaped him. "Found plenty of back-breaking labor. Claim jumpers, company men who'd cheat their own mothers, found men crushed in poorly shored tunnels and others dead from rockfalls because some company boss wouldn't spend money on proper timber. His arm tightened unconsciously around her, as if the memories themselves had chilled him. I worked mines from California to Colorado, saw too many good men die for other men's fortunes. After a while, I swore I'd never go back into a mine. Too many ghosts. Yet here you are, Sophia observed quietly, preparing to search for the Dutchman's mine. Caleb's gaze was fixed on the falling rain beyond the cave entrance. Ironic, isn't it? Why did you agree to help me then? She turned slightly within the circle of his arm, needing to see his face. You could have kept the map for yourself, or simply refused. He stared into the distance, his expression unreadable. Some debts can't be paid in coin. The cryptic answer hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Sophia sensed that they had reached the borders of what he was willing to reveal, that beyond lay territory connected to Charles in ways she might not wish to explore. Before she could press further, Caleb turned the conversation with smooth deliberation. And you? What really brought a Boston society woman to Silverado? There must be easier places for a widow to make a fresh start. Sophia recognized the deflection but accepted it, understanding instinctively that trust between them would build gradually or not at all. She pulled the blanket closer, gathering her thoughts. My father died 2 years ago, she began, finding it strangely easy to speak of things she'd kept carefully hidden in Silverado. Left substantial debts I knew nothing about, gambling debts mostly. He'd been speculating far beyond his means after my mother died, trying to rebuild a fortune that had already been quietly crumbling for years. Caleb listened silently, his face attentive but carefully neutral. Charles had been courting me, or rather courting my family name and what he thought was my dowry. She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. When father died and the creditors descended, Charles offered what seemed salvation. Marriage, respectability, promises to settle father's debts and restore our position. But he didn't, Caleb guessed, his voice gentle despite its roughness. No. He used what remained of my personal inheritance to pay off his own gambling debts, then disappeared west to seek opportunities. Letters came for a while, then nothing. Then word of his death. She stared at her hands, surprised to find them steady. By then, Boston society had discovered my reduced circumstances. Former friends became suddenly distant. Invitations ceased. I sold what little I had left and came west, hoping to outrun scandal and start anew. Only to find yourself serving whiskey to minors, Caleb observed, a note of something like admiration in his voice. Life does enjoy its little ironies. Sophia managed a wry smile, though I must say, after witnessing Boston society's idea of propriety, I found more genuine kindness in Madame Rosa's establishment than in most drawing rooms of Beacon Hill. A comfortable silence settled between them, punctuated by the steadily diminishing patter of rain. The storm was passing, its violence spent, leaving behind air that smelled of whetstone and sage. Evening approached, casting the cave in deepening shadows. Rain's letting up, Caleb noted, making no move to withdraw his arm from her shoulders. But the trail will be treacherous. Safer to make camp here for the night. Sophia nodded, strangely reluctant to disrupt their unexpected closeness. Something had shifted between them during this forced confinement. Not merely physical awareness, though that hummed beneath the surface like a plucked string, but a deeper recognition. They had each offered pieces of themselves, small truths that constructed a foundation for whatever lay ahead. I'll see to the horses, Caleb said finally, carefully withdrawing his arm and rising in one fluid movement. Then we should get a small fire going if possible. Might be a long, damp night otherwise. As he moved toward the cave entrance, Sophia wrapped the blanket more tightly around herself, already missing his warmth. She watched him tend to the animals with gentle efficiency, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the clearing sky beyond. For the first time since discovering the map, she found herself hoping their journey might prove longer than anticipated. The Dutchman's treasure remained their destination, But Sophia was beginning to suspect that the true discovery of this expedition might have nothing to do with Silver and everything to do with the quiet man who had just shared more of himself than he likely had with anyone in years. Outside, the last rays of sunlight broke through dissipating clouds, transforming raindrops clinging to sage and stone into countless tiny prisms. Inside, Sophia hugged her secret hope close, like the ember of a fire not yet fully kindled, but promising warmth to come. Night had fully descended, wrapping the small cave in shadows broken only by the modest fire Caleb had somehow coaxed to life with damp kindling and patient skill. Outside, the storm that had seemed to be abating rallied with renewed fury. Wind howled through the canyon like a wild thing seeking entry, driving rain against stone in rhythmic pulses. Sophia huddled near the fire, grateful for its meager warmth. Their supper had been simple, jerky softened in hot water with a handful of dried vegetables, creating something resembling stew. She'd eaten without complaint, surprising herself with her appetite after such an eventful day. Caleb sat nearby, whittling a small piece of wood with his pocket knife, his features cast in gold and shadow by the flickering flames. The companionable silence between them felt different now, charged with unspoken awareness following their shared confidences. A sudden crash of thunder, directly overhead by the sound of it, made Sophia jump. Her tin cup clattered to the stone floor, spilling the last of her coffee. "Just thunder," Caleb said, looking up from his carving. "Sound echoes something fierce in these canyons." "I know," Sophia replied, embarrassed by her reaction. "It just caught me by surprise." Another thunderclap followed immediately, even louder than the first. Despite her best intentions, Sophia flinched again. Wordlessly, Caleb moved closer, his arm slipping around her shoulders in what seemed an instinctive gesture of protection. The sudden proximity stole Sophia's breath. His body radiated heat and that indefinable masculine scent, leather, wood smoke, and something uniquely his own. She found herself leaning into him without conscious decision, drawn to his solidity in the midst of the storm's chaos. "Thank you," she whispered, her face turned up toward his. "I haven't felt safe since Charles died. Until now." In the firelight, Caleb's eyes darkened, focusing on her with an intensity that made her heart race. His calloused hand rose hesitantly, hovering a moment before gently touching her cheek. "Sophia, Whatever he intended to say remained unspoken as his gaze dropped to her lips. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Propriety and desire, past and present, caution and need, all warring in the scant inches between them. Sophia made the decision for both of them, closing the distance with a courage born of newfound clarity. Their lips met hesitantly at first, a question being asked and answered in the same breath. Then, as if a dam had broken, the kiss deepened with unexpected hunger. Caleb's hands moved to her waist, respectful yet possessive, steadying her as she swayed toward him. Her fingers found the rough fabric of a shirt, clutching the material as if to anchor herself against a swiftly running current. The world narrowed to sensation, the softness of his beard against her skin, the surprising gentleness of his mouth belying his strength, the thundering of her heart that drowned out even the storm's fury. All the rules of proper Boston society, all the careful restrictions of widowhood, dissolved like morning mist beneath the desert sun. When they finally parted, both breathing rapidly, Sophia saw her own wonder reflected in Caleb's expression, mingled with confusion and a desire that made her cheeks warm despite her years of marriage. For a heartbeat, his hands tightened at her waist, as if he might draw her back to him. Then, like a man waking from a dream, Caleb's expression shifted. He released her gently but firmly, putting physical distance between them, with careful deliberation. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Storm's passing by morning. We've got difficult terrain ahead." He moved to the opposite side of the small cave, unrolling his bedding with precise movements that suggested control maintained at considerable cost. The barrier he erected between them was more significant than mere physical space, a retreat into the solitary man she'd first encountered. Sophia touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss, and watched him settle onto his bedroll with his back to the fire. Something fundamental had changed between them, a threshold crossed that could never be retreated across, regardless of the distance he now enforced. Lightning illuminated the cave briefly, casting Caleb's silhouette into sharp relief, shoulders rigid with tension, body curled protectively around whatever secrets he still harbored. The thunder that followed seemed subdued, moving away as the storm gradually spent its fury against the ancient mountains. Sophia lay down on her own bedroll, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, the same blanket that still carried traces of his scent. Sleep would be long in coming, she knew, with the memory of his kiss still burning bright as the embers of their small fire. Tomorrow would bring sunlight and the resumed journey, practical concerns, and the search for silver. But nothing would be the same between them now. That single kiss had revealed a treasure potentially more valuable than any mine, and possibly just as dangerous to unearth. Chapter 4: Silver and Secrets. The morning after the storm dawned with the pristine clarity that only follows desert rain. Every rock gleamed, every cactus spine glistened, and the scent of damp earth mingled with sage and juniper hung in the air like an exotic perfume. Sophia breathed deeply as she saddled Penny, grateful for the returning warmth of the sun after their damp night in the cave. Neither she nor Caleb had mentioned the kiss. They had risen with first light, prepared a simple breakfast, and packed their belongings with practiced efficiency, all without a single reference to the moment that had changed everything between them. Yet Sophia caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his dark eyes troubled and thoughtful. By mid-morning, they'd left the canyon behind, climbing steadily toward a ridge that Caleb assured her marked the penultimate landmark on the Dutchman's map. The air thinned as they ascended, sweet and sharp in Sophia's lungs. Wildflowers had erupted from the desert floor overnight, splashing the landscape with unexpected color. Nature's brief celebration following the storm. "We're close," Caleb said, breaking a silence that had stretched for nearly an hour. "See that formation ahead? The one that looks like a sleeping cat?" Sophia shaded her eyes against the sun. The distant outcropping did indeed resemble a feline, its stone head resting on massive paws, its back a graceful curve against the blue sky. "The map shows it?" she asked, unconsciously urging Penny to a faster pace. Caleb nodded, matching her increased tempo. The Dutchman called it El Gato Dormido, one of the clearest landmarks he identified. Beyond it should be a box canyon, and at its end... He didn't finish the sentence, but the gleam in his eyes completed the thought. They reached the stone formation by early afternoon. Caleb dismounted, comparing the weathered rock face to the map with careful scrutiny. His fingers traced peculiar markings, shallow indentations and lines that might have been natural erosion but formed patterns too regular for mere coincidence. "This is it," he confirmed, his voice hushed with something like reverence. "These marks match the map exactly. Someone carved these trail signs for those who knew what to look for." Sophia joined him, her gloved fingers exploring the ancient marks. The Dutchman? Or Spanish miners before him. These mountains have drawn treasure seekers for centuries. Caleb's expression grew animated in a way she'd never witnessed before, passion for discovery briefly overwhelming his customary reserve. The canyon entrance should be just beyond that turn. They led their horses around the massive outcropping, following a barely discernible trail that wound between chest-high boulders. As the path curved, it revealed a narrow canyon mouth, its walls rising sheer on either side. Dense mesquite and creosote bushes partially obscured the entrance, explaining how it might have remained undiscovered by casual prospectors. "The vegetation's thicker than I'd expect in this terrain," Caleb observed, pushing aside a thorny branch. "Means there's water nearby, a good sign for mining operations." They tethered the horses in a small clearing with access to sparse grazing and proceeded on foot. The canyon narrowed as they advanced, its walls casting deep shadows despite the afternoon sun. Sophia felt a curious prickling along her spine. Not fear exactly, but awareness that they walked a path few had trodden in years, perhaps decades. After nearly 20 minutes of careful progress, the canyon ended abruptly in a rock face that at first appeared solid. Caleb studied it intently, comparing features to the final section of the map. "Should be here," he muttered, running his hands over the stone surface. "The map shows an opening." Sophia moved toward the right wall, where thick overgrowth clung tenaciously to the rock face. Could it be hidden? Deliberately concealed, perhaps? Together, they began clearing away vegetation, revealing what initially appeared to be just another portion of the canyon wall. But as more brush was removed, a dark recess became visible. A mine entrance, partially collapsed, but unmistakable. Caleb stood motionless before the opening, his expression suddenly guarded. Sophia recalled his earlier words. "I swore I'd never go back into a mine. Too many ghosts." She reached for his hand, her fingers interlacing with his work-roughened ones. "Together," she said simply. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly at her touch. With a nod that conveyed more than words could express, he retrieved a small lantern from his pack, lit it, and ducked into the low entrance. The mine tunnel extended perhaps 15 feet before opening into a larger chamber, clearly man-made but enhanced from a natural cave. Old timbers, weathered but still sound, supported the ceiling in crucial places. The air was cool and surprisingly fresh, suggesting some form of natural ventilation. Caleb raised the lantern, its light catching on the chamber walls. For a moment, Sophia saw nothing remarkable, just rock, earth, the remnants of old mining tools. Then Caleb moved the light slightly, and the wall to their right seemed to come alive, glittering as if embedded with thousands of tiny stars. "My God," Caleb breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. He approached the wall reverently, running his fingers along a prominent vein that threaded through the rock like a frozen lightning bolt. "Sophia, this is bigger than anything I've seen. High-grade ore, nearly pure in some spots." He turned to her, his face transformed by wonder. The Dutchman wasn't exaggerating. This could be one of the richest strikes in the territory. The reality of their discovery struck Sophia like a physical force. This was no myth, no wild goose chase, but tangible wealth, security, independence, a future free from the indignities she'd suffered since Charles's death. "We found it," she whispered, scarcely believing the words, even as she spoke them. "We actually found it." Caleb nodded, his grin boyish and unrestrained for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. He produced a small pick from his pack and carefully extracted several samples of ore, wrapping them in a bandana for safekeeping. "We'll need to file a claim as soon as possible," he said, his practical nature reasserting itself. "This discovery won't stay secret long once we bring these samples to the assay office." Sophia barely heard him. Impulsively, she spun in a circle of pure joy, arms outstretched, laughing at the sheer improbability of their success. Her movement kicked up decades of settled dust, dancing in the lantern light like golden motes. Caught in her infectious delight, Caleb set down the lantern and caught her mid-twirl. His hands encircled her waist, and with surprising strength he lifted her high, their laughter echoing against the silver-veined walls. For a moment, they were not partners in a business arrangement, but simply a man and woman sharing triumph against impossible odds. As he lowered her slowly to her feet, their faces aligned, joy still illuminating his features. Sophia thought he might kiss her again, there amid the treasure they'd sought. Instead, he set her gently on her feet and stepped back, though his smile remained undiminished. "We should mark the entrance carefully and make camp while there's still daylight," he said, his voice warm with residual excitement. "Tomorrow we can take more samples and plan our next steps." That evening, they made camp in a small clearing near the canyon mouth, close enough to their discovery to feel protective, yet far enough to see the vast canopy of stars that emerged as darkness fell. The temperature dropped sharply with nightfall, but their campfire provided ample warmth, its flames sending shadows dancing across the canyon walls. Caleb produced the last of their whiskey, a small amount saved for medicinal purposes, and poured equal measures into their tin cup. He raised his in a toast, "To the Dutchman, wherever he may be." "And to Charles," Sophia added after a moment's reflection. "Whatever his faults, the map was genuine." They drank, the liquor warming a path to Sophia's stomach. The evening felt somehow enchanted, suspended between their past struggles and future prosperity. A perfect moment of achievement before the complications that would inevitably follow. "What will you do with your share?" she asked, watching the firelight play across Caleb's features. "Once we've filed the claim and arranged for proper mining operations," he stared into the flames, turning his cup slowly between his palms. "Never really thought I'd find it," he admitted. "Never allowed myself to believe it was more than a legend. But now that we have," Caleb shrugged, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Maybe a larger smithy, better equipment, a proper house nearby. The simplicity of his ambition touched her deeply. No grand schemes or excessive desires, just modest improvements to a life he already found satisfying. Not a mansion in San Francisco, or a return east as a wealthy man, she teased gently. He shook his head. Never cared much for cities. Too many people, too much noise. His eyes met hers across the fire. What about you? Will you return to Boston society, properly funded this time? Sophia considered the question, surprised to find herself hesitant where once her answer would have been immediate. I thought that's what I wanted, she said slowly. A triumphant return, the satisfaction of seeing those who snubbed me forced to acknowledge me again. And now? Now I wonder if there might be more satisfaction in building something new than in reclaiming something lost. She gazed up at the star-strewn sky, impossibly vast above their small fire. Perhaps a home in a growing western town. Investments in local businesses, the freedom to choose my own path without society's constraint. Caleb nodded as if her answer confirmed something he'd suspected. The West changes people, strips away pretensions, shows what really matters. The earnest simplicity of his philosophy warmed Sophia more than the whiskey had. On impulse, she set down her cup and moved around the fire to sit beside him on the fallen log he'd dragged near the flames for seating. "Thank you," she said softly, "for agreeing to this mad venture, for believing the map, for—" She hesitated, uncertain how to express the deeper gratitude she felt for the respect he'd shown her, the dignity he'd allowed her to maintain through their journey. Rather than fumbling for inadequate words, she leaned toward him, her hand finding his cheek, gently turning his face toward hers. His beard felt rough beneath her palm, his skin warm from the fire. For a heartbeat, he remained perfectly still, his dark eyes reflecting twin flames, the campfire and something more personal, more elemental. Then Sophia closed the remaining distance between them, her lips finding his with newfound confidence. This kiss held none of the desperate hunger of their first embrace in the cave, but something deeper, appreciation, connection, and dawning possibility. Caleb's hand rose to cradle the back of her head, his touch exquisitely gentle as he returned the kiss with equal measure. They remained thus, connected in the flickering light, the discovered silver forgotten in favor of a different, more precious finding. When they finally parted, Sophia saw no confusion in Caleb's eyes this time, only wondering admiration and banked desire. "The claim office won't be going anywhere," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. Sophia smiled, remaining within the circle of his arm as they watched sparks from their fire rise to join the distant stars. Bright promises, illuminating a future suddenly rich with possibilities that had nothing to do with silver veins or hidden treasures. Their kiss deepened, a silent conversation where words had proven insufficient. The crackling fire and whispering desert wind served as their only witnesses as Sophia's hand slid from Caleb's cheek to the nape of his neck, drawing him closer. His arm tightened around her waist, erasing what little space remained between them on the fallen log. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Sophia saw her own wonder reflected in Caleb's eyes. The vast canopy of stars stretched endlessly above them, diamond bright against the velvet darkness, seeming to bend low over their small campfire as if heaven itself leaned down to witness this moment of connection. Caleb's thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "Sophia," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. She turned her face to press a kiss against his palm, feeling the calluses that spoke of his strength and labor. Their next kiss held none of the hesitation of their previous encounters. Urgency filled them both, months of solitude and years of loneliness building to this moment of shared discovery. His hands tangled in her hair, loosening pins until the heavy mass tumbled down her back. Sophia's fingers worked the buttons of his vest, driven by a need to be closer still. Suddenly, Caleb pulled back, his breathing ragged. "Sophia, you're a lady. I shouldn't." His voice was husky with restraint, his eyes dark with desire he fought to control. She placed her fingertips against his lips, stopping his words. "I'm a woman," she corrected softly, making my own choices. The firelight caught the determination in her eyes, along with something deeper, a freedom born of shedding society's constraints. And I choose this. I choose you. For a heartbeat, he remained motionless, searching her face as if to assure himself of her certainty. Whatever he saw there seemed to dissolve his final reservations. Slowly, deliberately, she took his hand and guided it to the buttons of her blouse. His calloused fingers trembled slightly as he undid the first one, then the next, his eyes never leaving hers, offering her every opportunity to change her mind. But Sophia had never been more certain of anything. Each button undone felt like liberation. Each inch of skin revealed a declaration of independence from the strictures that had bound her all her life. When her blouse hung open, revealing the fine cotton of her chemise beneath, she found the courage to reach for his shirt, working the buttons with fingers that trembled not with uncertainty but anticipation. They undressed each other slowly beside the campfire, their movements unhurried despite the urgency that thrummed between them. Caleb's body was illuminated by the golden light of the flames, revealing a landscape of muscle and sinew shaped by years of hard work. Sophia's gaze traced the scars that mapped his torso, a jagged line across his ribs, a star-shaped mark on his shoulder, thin white stripes across his back that spoke of older, deeper hurts. Her fingers followed her gaze, silently questioning their stories. Mining accidents, he explained softly as she touched the mark on his shoulder. Cave-in. Her fingers moved to his back. He tensed slightly. Those are from before. My father wasn't my mother's only husband. The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, pierced Sophia's heart. She leaned forward, pressing her lips to the largest scar, blessing it with tenderness to replace the cruelty that had created it. Caleb's breath caught at the gesture, his hands tightening where they rested at her waist. When he finally laid her down on the blanket he'd spread near the fire, Sophia felt none of the nervousness she might have expected. Her marriage to Charles had been a dutiful arrangement, physical affection performed rather than shared. But in Caleb's eyes, she saw something Charles had never shown: reverence, desire, and genuine caring, braided together into something that transcended mere passion. Caleb's touch was gentle yet confident as he explored her body, as if mapping territory he intended to claim thoroughly. His blacksmith's hands, so powerful in their daily work, proved capable of astonishing delicacy as they traced the curves of her hips, the dip of her waist, the fullness of her breasts. Sophia's initial shyness dissolved under his careful ministrations, giving way to desire that surged through her like the desert flash flood they'd witnessed days before, unstoppable, primal, transformative. "You're beautiful," he whispered against her collarbone, his beard creating exquisite friction against her sensitive skin. "So beautiful it hurts to look at you." Her hands moved over his back, feeling the play of muscles beneath his skin as he positioned himself above her. When they joined, it was with a tenderness that brought unexpected tears to Sophia's eyes, not from pain, but from the profound rightness of their union. Caleb kissed away the moisture on her cheeks, misreading its cause. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, holding perfectly still. "No," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "You've healed me." Their lovemaking began gently, a slow building of pleasure that allowed Sophia to discover sensations she had never known existed. But as passion overtook restraint, their movements grew more urgent, bodies speaking an ancient language of need and fulfillment. Caleb whispered her name like an incantation as they moved together beneath the star-strewn sky, the campfire's light gilding their entwined forms. At the height of pleasure, Sophia felt as though she had discovered a treasure far more precious than silver, a connection that transcended physical desire, a belonging she had never experienced, even in the most privileged circles of Boston society. Her release came as a revelation, waves of sensation that caused her to cry out, clinging to Caleb's shoulders as he followed her into that realm of perfect unity. Afterward, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms, Sophia felt truly at peace for the first time since arriving in the West, perhaps for the first time in her life. Caleb's heartbeat steadied beneath her ear, strong and reassuring. His fingers traced idle patterns along her spine as he pressed occasional kisses to her hair. "Having regrets?" he asked softly, a hint of vulnerability in the question. Sophia raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes, wanting him to see the truth in hers. "Not a single one," she answered with conviction. "Are you?" His smile was answer enough, but he added words for certainty's sake. "Only that we didn't find that silver vein weeks ago." Their laughter mingled in the night air, a perfect counterpoint to the crackling fire and distant coyote song that serenaded their newfound happiness. Silverado appeared much as they had left it, a collection of weathered buildings scattered along a single dusty street. Yet Sophia viewed it through new eyes as they rode into town 3 days later. What had once represented desperation now seemed merely a waypoint in a journey that had led her to unexpected treasure. Their saddlebags contained carefully wrapped samples from the Dutchman's mine, tangible proof of their discovery. More importantly, they carried the certainty of their feelings for each other, a private wealth that outshone even the high-grade silver ore they'd discovered. Sophia noticed the stares immediately. As they passed the Silver Dollar, Ginny paused in sweeping the boardwalk, her broom forgotten as she gaped at the returning travelers. 2 miners stopped mid-conversation, their eyes following Caleb and Sophia with undisguised curiosity. From an upstairs window, Madame Rosa observed their return, her expression revealing nothing, but her gaze missing nothing. "Seems we've been missed," Caleb commented dryly, touching the brim of his hat to Madame Rosa with casual respect. "Or at least noticed," Sophia replied, uncomfortably aware of the whispers that trailed in their wake. "I told Mrs. Tolliver I'd found work as a housekeeper outside town, and I mentioned taking a commission for iron work at a ranch north of here." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Apparently our stories weren't entirely believed. What gave us away? The fact that we left together, or that neither of us specified exactly where we were going?" "Probably my failure to pack any blacksmithing tools," Caleb admitted with a rueful chuckle. "Silverado doesn't miss much." They reined in before the assay office, a small but official-looking building near the center of town. Sophia remained mounted while Caleb retrieved one of the sample bags from his saddlebags. "Best if I handle this part alone," he said quietly. "Less questions that way." "Meet you at the hotel in an hour?" She nodded, understanding the wisdom of maintaining at least a semblance of propriety in town. Whatever freedoms they had discovered in the wilderness, they had agreed during the return journey to be discreet about both their relationship and their discovery until the claim was properly registered. As Caleb disappeared into the assay office, Sophia nudged Penny toward the hotel, conscious of the curious gazes that followed her progress. Mrs. Tolliver stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her ample bosom, her expression a mixture of disapproval and avid interest. "Well, well," the landlady drawled as Sophia dismounted. "If it isn't the respectable widow returned from her housekeeping position. Funny sort of housekeeping that leaves a woman looking like she's been riding the range for a week." Sophia met the woman's gaze calmly, no longer intimidated by such petty judgments. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Tolliver. I trust you've kept my room available as arranged." The landlady sniffed. "Paid through the end of the week, didn't you? Though if I'd known you were traipsing about the countryside with Reeves, I might have had second thoughts about renting to a woman of such flexible morals." A week earlier, the insinuation would have cut Sophia to the quick. Now, secure in the knowledge of what she and Caleb had found, both in the mine and in each other, she merely smiled. "How fortunate that you were not required to strain your thoughts, then. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to clean up before dinner." Inside the assay office, Caleb placed his samples on the counter with deliberate casualness. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched precariously on a pointed nose, barely glanced up from his ledger. "Samples for testing?" he asked without particular interest. "If you don't mind." Caleb kept his voice neutral despite the excitement that had built during their return journey. The samples they'd selected represented only the most modest veins from the Dutchman's mine, revealing enough to establish value without betraying the true extent of their discovery. The clerk unwrapped the first sample with the bored efficiency of a man who had seen thousands of hopeful specimens, the vast majority worthless. As the dull gleam of ore was revealed, his expression remained unchanged. He reached for his lope, positioning it over one eye as he examined the rock more closely. Then, in a transformation that would have been comical under other circumstances, the clerk's posture straightened as if he'd been jolted with electricity. He adjusted his spectacles, examined the sample again, then reached for the second package with considerably more enthusiasm. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "That information will be included with my claim registration," Caleb replied evenly. "I'd just like your professional assessment of the quality for now." The clerk swallowed visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing in his scrawny throat. "This is exceptional quality, Mr. Reeves. Some of the highest grade silver ore I've seen in this office." He hesitated, glancing toward the door, as if concerned about being overheard. "If you're filing a claim, I'd suggest you do it immediately, today if possible." Caleb nodded, unsurprised by the advice. "I'll need the proper forms." As the clerk hurried to retrieve the necessary paperwork, Caleb allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. By this time tomorrow, the Dutchman's mine would be legally registered in both his and Sophia's names. A partnership in more ways than one. By evening, the silver dollar buzzed with speculation about their find. Though Caleb had sworn the clerk to confidentiality, such secrets rarely remained contained in a town the size of Silverado. As Sophia had observed, the settlement had only one street, and 1,000 ears eager for any distraction from the hardscrabble routine of frontier life. Seated at his usual corner table, Caleb nursed a whiskey while listening to the theories that circulated around him. Some claimed he had found gold rather than silver. Others insisted he'd discovered an Apache treasure cache. Still others suggested his mysterious journey had nothing to do with mining at all, but rather with the beautiful widow who had disappeared the same day. The latter speculation came closest to the truth, Caleb acknowledged silently. For while the silver discovery would change their financial circumstances dramatically, it was the treasure he'd found in Sophia Fairbank that truly transformed his world. Tomorrow would bring complications enough: claim registrations, business decisions, and the inevitable attention their discovery would attract. But tonight, in the room they now shared at the far end of the hotel corridor, away from prying eyes, awaited the only wealth that truly mattered to a man who had spent too many years alone with his regrets and secrets. Sophia and Caleb chose to dine at the hotel restaurant that evening, rather than brave the curious stares at the silver dollar. The establishment boasted little in the way of refinement: checkered tablecloths that had seen better days, mismatched crockery, and a menu that offered beef, beans, or both. But it provided relative privacy for their discussion of next steps. "The claim is registered in both our names," Caleb confirmed, keeping his voice low despite the restaurant's sparse occupancy. "First thing tomorrow, we should return to the site and post the official markers. Then we can discuss how to proceed with development." Sophia nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We'll need investors, I assume. Proper equipment, workers." "Capital," Caleb agreed, though with samples of that quality, financing shouldn't be difficult to secure. "Particularly delicious news travels swiftly, doesn't it?" A cultured voice interrupted their conversation. Sophia looked up to find a portly gentleman standing beside their table, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place amid Silverado's usual frontier attire. His florid face bore the flush of habitual drinking, but his small eyes were shrewd and assessing beneath sparse blonde brows. A heavy gold watch chain stretched across his considerable girth, punctuated by a diamond stick pin that caught the lamplight. "Edgar Winchester," the man introduced himself with a slight bow toward Sophia. "Owner of Winchester Mining Company, may I join you?" Before either could respond, Winchester pulled out a chair and lowered himself into it with an assumption of welcome that bordered on rudeness. He signaled the waiter for a drink before turning his attention back to them, his smile never reaching his calculating eyes. "Impressive find, Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Fairbank. Word spreads quickly in mining communities, especially when Horace Jenkins at the assay office starts stuttering with excitement." He chuckled, though the sound contained no genuine mirth. "My company would like to make an offer. Cash for your claim. A very generous sum, I assure you." Caleb's posture had stiffened the moment Winchester appeared, his earlier relaxed demeanor replaced by watchful tension. "The claim isn't for sale." Winchester's gaze shifted to Caleb, lingering with strange familiarity. Something dark flickered behind Caleb's eyes, a shadow that Sophia had glimpsed before when certain subjects arose. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his fork. "We haven't dealt at all, Winchester," he replied, voice flat. The mining magnate's smile widened, taking on a predatory edge. "No, perhaps I'm mistaken. So many prospectors over the years, one face blends into another." He turned to Sophia, his manner abruptly shifting to exaggerated courtesy. "Mrs. Fairbank, surely you can appreciate the advantages of an immediate cash settlement. Mining operations require significant investment, experienced management, patience, whereas a substantial bank draft requires no effort whatsoever." "I appreciate your concern for my finances, Mr. Winchester," Sophia replied coolly, "but as Mr. Reeves stated, our claim is not for sale." Winchester's jovial mask slipped momentarily, revealing calculation and something harder beneath. He recovered quickly, raising his newly arrived whiskey in a mock toast. "Ambitious, I admire that, but the offer remains open should you reconsider. Mining is a hazardous business. Accidents happen with alarming frequency, especially to inexperienced operators." The barely veiled threat hung in the air between them. Caleb's expression hardened to granite. "Not interested, Winchester. Now or ever." The rotund man sighed theatrically, draining his whiskey in a single swallow before rising. "As you wish. Though do remember, initial refusals often give way to more practical considerations when realities of the situation become clearer." He tipped his hat to Sophia with affected gallantry. "A pleasure, Mrs. Fairbank. I suspect we'll speak again soon." As Winchester waddled toward the exit, Sophia studied Caleb's face, noting the muscle working in his jaw and the rigid control with which he held himself. More concerning was the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water glass. "What was that about?" she asked quietly when Winchester had gone. "The business near Boulder City he mentioned." "Old business," Caleb dismissed, though his tone lacked conviction. "Winchester has his finger in every mining operation in the territory. Our paths crossed years ago, that's all." "Caleb," she placed her hand over his, feeling the tension vibrating through him. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." For a moment she thought he might confide in her. His eyes met hers, troubled and conflicted. Then he withdrew his hand gently, but definitely. "Nothing worth revisiting." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We should turn in early. Long ride back to the claim tomorrow." Sophia recognized the evasion, but chose not to press further. For now. Whatever connection existed between Caleb Reeves, Edgar Winchester, and possibly Charles Fairbank would eventually come to light. She just hoped that when it did, the revelation wouldn't destroy everything they'd built together. They departed at first light, eager to secure their claim properly after Winchester's implied threats. The journey that had taken nearly a week on their initial expedition now required just 3 days, their familiarity with the route allowing for more direct travel. Despite Caleb's assertion that Winchester's interests posed no immediate concern, Sophia noted his increased vigilance, checking their back trail frequently, insisting they make camp in less obvious locations, keeping their fire small and well shielded. As they approached the box canyon on the 3rd day, Caleb reined in thunder abruptly, his posture alerting Sophia before he spoke. "Someone's been here." She followed his gaze to the canyon entrance. Nothing seemed immediately amiss, yet as they drew closer, subtle signs became apparent. Branches broken in a pattern inconsistent with natural causes. Horse droppings too fresh to have been left during their previous visit. Disturbed gravel where booted feet had recently trod. "Winchester?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving to the small revolver Caleb had insisted she carry. "Possibly, or independent prospectors who noticed our trail." His expression was grim as he dismounted, examining the ground with the eye of an experienced tracker. Multiple horses, 4, maybe 5 men. Day old at most. They proceeded cautiously, leading their mounts rather than riding, alert for any sign of continued presence. The canyon seemed deserted, silent save for the whisper of wind through the rock walls and the occasional call of a circling hawk. At the mine entrance, evidence of intruders became unmistakable. The brush they had carefully arranged to conceal the opening had been torn away. More disturbing was the claim post they had planted, now defaced with a crude warning carved into the wood: "Abandon or die." Subtle, Sophia remarked, her attempt at humor doing little to disguise her unease. Caleb's jaw tightened as he examined the surroundings with methodical care. Wait here with the horses. I want to check inside, make sure they haven't damaged the workings. I'm coming with you. Sophia's tone brooked no argument. We're partners, remember? After a moment's hesitation, he nodded, though his reluctance was evident. Stay behind me, and if I say run, you run. No questions. They approached the mine entrance cautiously, Caleb pausing every few steps to examine the ground and surrounding rock face. The opening appeared unchanged save for the cleared vegetation, the partially collapsed entrance still requiring them to duck low to. Something's not right, he murmured, running his hand along the timber supporting the entranceway. This has been tampered with. Before Sophia could respond, a faint clicking sound reached them from within the darkness of the tunnel. Caleb's eyes widened in recognition and alarm. Out, now! He grabbed her arm, pushing her ahead of him toward daylight with desperate urgency. They had nearly reached the entrance when the world exploded around them. The controlled blast wasn't large, but in the confined space of the tunnel, its effect was devastating. Rock and timber crashed down as the weakened supports gave way. Sophia felt herself propelled forward by Caleb's powerful shove, tumbling into the daylight as dust and debris billowed from the collapsing entrance. She scrambled to her feet, choking on rock dust, momentarily disoriented. Caleb? Through the settling debris, she spotted him, half buried in rubble at the tunnel mouth, one arm outstretched toward her. Blood streaked his dust-covered face, but his eyes were open, alert with pain and relief at her safety. Don't move, she commanded, rushing to his side. Let me see how badly you're trapped. The next hour passed in a blur of desperate activity. The falling rocks had caught Caleb's left shoulder and leg, but mercifully, most of the collapse had occurred behind him, the largest debris missing his vital areas. With careful leverage and Caleb's guidance, Sophia managed to free him piece by piece, her muscles screaming in protest against weights they were never designed to lift. When he was finally clear, the extent of his injuries became apparent. A deep gash across his shoulder, extensive bruising along his left side, and a possible fracture to his collarbone. But he was alive, conscious, and with Sophia's assistance, able to hobble to their campsite. We need to clean these wounds, she said, easing him onto his bedroll. The sun had begun its descent, painting the canyon in deep orange and lengthening shadows. And you shouldn't travel until tomorrow at the earliest. Caleb grimaced as she helped him remove his torn shirt. They might come back. Check if their trap worked. Let them come, Sophia replied, with a fierceness that surprised them both. She withdrew her revolver, placing it within easy reach. I'm an excellent shot, Father insisted all his children learn, even his daughters. Despite his pain, Caleb's mouth quirked in a shadow of his usual smile. Remind me never to underestimate you, Sophia Fairbank. She worked efficiently, cleaning his wounds with water boiled with witch hazel bark, a remedy Rosa had pressed upon her before their departure, with a knowing look that suggested the saloon owner missed very little about the nature of their relationship. The gash on his shoulder was deep but clean, the edges knitting well once she'd removed all debris and applied pressure to stop the bleeding. You're fortunate, she told him, wrapping a clean bandage around his shoulder. Another foot to the right, and that falling rock would have crushed your skull instead. Always did have a hard head, he muttered, wincing as she tightened the bandage. As evening fell, Caleb's temperature rose. Not dangerously high, but enough to concern Sophia. She coaxed him to drink willow bark tea, bathing his forehead with cool water as he drifted between lucidity and fevered dozing. During one such period of restlessness, he grasped her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes glazed but intense. Should have told you, he mumbled. Should have warned Charles. Didn't know Winchester would... Sophia froze, her pulse suddenly thundering in her ears. Charles? My husband? Caleb's gaze cleared momentarily, awareness flooding back as he realized what he'd revealed. Conflicting emotions chased across his features, regret, guilt, resignation. Sophia, he began, his voice hoarse with more than physical pain. I can explain. But explanation would have to wait. From the canyon entrance came the unmistakable sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving with the confidence of men who believed their trap had succeeded. Caleb struggled to sit upright, his face pale beneath the dirt and blood. Help me up. Get behind those rocks. As Sophia reached for the revolver, her mind whirled with questions that must remain unanswered for now. Whatever connection existed between Caleb, Winchester, and her dead husband would have to wait. Survival came first. And then, if they lived through the night, truth. That's the end of part 1. If you're ready for more drama, romance, and shifter magic, part 2 is waiting for you. Find the link in the comments or description below. Thanks for listening and see you in the next part.